Hello, I'm Paul Sevinglis, and I've got some theatre books to recommend to you as gifts. And the first of them is a wonderful, what I suppose you would call coffee table book, though frankly it's so big it hardly fits on my coffee table, and I've had to raise the shelf on my bookcase to fit it in. If you go to London theatres at all, so many of them are steeped in history, and you'll inevitably notice the most fascinating decoration, plasterwork, gold leaf, paintings, sculptures. This book tells you all about them. It's a new edition, has fantastic photographs by Peter Daisley, which are just tremendous pictures, both massive spreads of auditoria, but also detailed pictures as well. Let me try and find you an example of one of those. Little detail there. There, looking up into the flies. Dressing room. Front of a box with cherubs. Sometimes it's little details you might not normally have noticed. On other occasions, it's glimpses backstage. But unlike many coffee table books, which are really there purely for the photographs, it also has a fascinating words to accompany those lovely pictures. Written by Michael Coveney. Just taking a random example here, he writes about the Novello Theatre. Says, the last great actor-manager, Herbert Beerbone Tree, lived in the dome of the theatre he built, Her Majesty's, for 20 years, and crime writer Edgar Wallace took an apartment at the top of Wyndham's for several years. Ivor Novello, the extraordinary popular composer of Keep the Home Fires Burning and We'll Gather Lilacs, made an even more permanent and long-lasting home of a theatrical address. He moved into an apartment at the top of the Strand Theatre with his mother in 1913 and died there in 1951, aged 58. His funeral attracted crowds on the street comparable only to those subsequently of Winston Churchill and Princess Diana. So how fleeting is fame. You feel as though the renaming of the theatre as the Novello in 2005, after a major refurbishment by Delphont Mackintosh Theatres, is a stern and long overdue memory jog to the collective theatre-going consciousness. It's full of facts, detailed history, and lovely little anecdotes as well. So I thoroughly recommend London Theatres. And talking of anecdotes, another book that I recommend is the Oxford Book of Theatrical Anecdotes, edited in its latest edition by Giles Brandreth. It's a good, heavy tome, but because it's split up into lots and lots of little anecdotes going right back to Shakespeare and through to the current day, it's the sort of book you can happily dip into, have a few minutes or hours amusement, go away with some lovely stories that you can possibly recount to your friends at the next dinner you go to, if we ever get to go to dinners again. And at the insistence of the Oxford University Press, they all have to be authenticated. Shame in a way, because some of the best anecdotes really can't be authenticated. But fortunately, Brandreth does manage to mention a few of those in his introduction. For example, the quite famous one about Ralph Richardson appearing in a production of What the Butler Saw, and at one point moving to the front of the stage and calling out, "Is there a doctor in the house?" And when someone in the auditorium stood up and said, "Yes, I'm a doctor," he said, "Doctor, isn't this play terrible?" Much of it is to do with the joy of live theatre, where all the participants live on their nerves in anticipation of things that can and do go wrong. And of course, actors tell lovely stories. They don't mind being self-deprecating, and they certainly don't mind being bitchy about others. There's one story in there told by Ronnie Barker about a young actor who was overcome by first night nerves that he used to get down on his knees on stage and pray to his maker. "Don't rely too much on him in the third act, laddie," whispered the leading man. "He's helping me with a quick costume change." One anecdote told by Brandreth himself, and I'll just read this one to you. "I was taken, this is as a child, I was taken to the Old Vic Theatre in London to see my first Romeo and Juliet. It was directed by Franco Zeffirelli and starred a young Judi Dench as Juliet. I went with my parents. It turned out that Judi Dench's parents were there too. When Juliet came on and said to the nurse, played by Peggy Mount, 'Where are my father and my mother, nurse?' a reassuring voice called out from the stalls, 'Here we are, darling, in row H.'" He says it's true. Anyway, it is a wonderful book and well worth its place in anyone's theatre book library. Probably the best theatrical biography or autobiography this year is Tom Stoppard, A Life, written by Hermione Lee. Opinions divided about Stoppard. Some certainly consider him the greatest living English playwright. The book is very nice about him, but it does tell us a lot of interesting stuff. But if you do, like me, just enjoy the theatre of his work, Hermione Lee is tremendous at giving you detailed analysis of those plays. If you're not so interested in the plays, you can skip that and go for the equally detailed information about his social life. Back to coffee table books. This isn't a new book, but if you know anyone who has enjoyed Hamilton, and I know these days, partly because it's now available on Disney Plus channel, a lot of people have enjoyed Hamilton and really become, well, a bit like me actually, quite fanatical about it because it's such a brilliant musical. There is an accompanying book, Hamilton, The Revolution, and this was conceived actually in the early days of the production, so diaries were kept, and what you end up with is a book which not only gives you the script and pictures, find a bigger one for you, pictures from the show, but also stories by the people involved. So, for example, there's a whole interview here with Jonathan Groff, who of course plays King George. It's a superbly produced book, as you can see, and also a fascinating insight into the production of a theatrical show. So you've got a lot of information, interviews, stories about the people involved, about how the production came about, and then a lot of background about the various events and songs. That's Hamilton, The Revolution. And finally, a little book called On the Roof. And this is about a very interesting production that was put on not that long ago of Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish. And it's been put together by the youngest cast member, but it collects together stories from many of the people involved in the production, from the auditions through rehearsals to the actual production. So if you love theatre, you get lots of insights into putting on a production. And this production, of course, was interesting in itself, this idea of putting on a Yiddish version of Fiddler on the Roof in America. So a very good read for anybody who is interested in theatre. I'm Paul Seven Lewis, and those are my 5 suggestions for books for theatre lovers. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, 1 Minute Theatre Reviews, or if you're more of a reader, visit my website, 1minutetheatrereviews.co.uk. You can also listen to me playing music from and talking about stage musicals on Bix Office Radio, with the podcast version available on mixcloud.com. Thank you for watching.